Hi guys, it's story time with Grandma. Tonight we're going to read Mrs. Potter's Pig. Mrs. Potter kept a spotless house. The windows glistened, the floors glowed. She even dusted the chickens until they squawked. Everything in Mrs. Potter's house was swept and washed and polished and mopped perfectly clean. Everything except baby Ermagene. Ermagene loved mess. She drooled and gurgled on her white ruffled dresses. After every meal, she had applesauce behind her ears, and any speck of dirt in the yard clung to baby Ermagene like bees to clover. "Ermagene," complained Mrs. Potter, "you're as dirty as a little pig. Someday, if you're not careful, you'll turn into one." Grunt, gurgle. Ermagene even sounded like a pig. She did not coo and babble like other babies. She snorted and snuffled when she slept. She gurgled and grunted while she ate. One sunny day, Mrs. Potter tucked Ermagene into her buggy, gave her a rice cake, and wheeled her out into the yard to get some sun. "Now, sit here and stay clean," Mrs. Potter told Ermagene, and off she went to dust the picket fence. But Ermagene soon got bored. Clutching her rice cake, she crawled out of the buggy and across the lawn, leaving a trail of crumbs behind her. Straight through the loose board in the pig pen fence crawled baby Ermagene, smack into the middle of the biggest, muddiest puddle she could find. Ermagene squealed with joy and dropped her rice cake in the mud. A little piglet came and gobbled it up. He followed the trail of rice cake crumbs through the loose board in the pig pen fence, across the lawn, and straight up into the baby buggy. Mrs. Potter dusted the last picket on the fence and stretched her arms in the sun. "What a fine day," she said to herself. "I'll just take baby Ermagene for a stroll before I wax the weather vane on the barn." She peeked into the buggy. Little snorts came from a bump under the blanket. "How sweet," thought Mrs. Potter. "Baby Ermagene is sleeping." She wheeled the buggy out through the gate and down the road. "This road could use a little sweeping," she said to herself. The buggy bounced and bumped and woke the piglet up. "Snort," said the piglet under the blanket. "The lilacs look a little dusty," Mrs. Potter remarked. "Snuffle," said the piglet as it rooted for more rice cake crumbs. "The trees could use some sprucing up," said Mrs. Potter. "Grunt," said the piglet. It poked its snout from under the blanket. "Eek!" screamed Mrs. Potter. "Oh, Ermagene, it's finally happened. You are a little pig." She snatched the piglet out of the buggy and hugged it tight. "Don't worry, Ermagene," she comforted the baby pig. Back up the road she raced to call the doctor to see what could be done. As she opened the gate, the piglet squirmed free and ran toward the loose board in the pig pen fence. "Come back, Ermagene," Mrs. Potter cried. She sprinted to the pig pen, and there, in the mud, sat baby Ermagene. "Oh, Ermagene, thank goodness you're yourself again," cried Mrs. Potter. "Come out of there this instant." Ermagene squealed and clutched a fistful of mud. "Come out right now," ordered Mrs. Potter, "or I shall have to come and get you." Ermagene dug her toes into the mud and snorted with glee. Mrs. Potter sighed. She took off her shoes and socks and climbed over the pig pen fence. "Skews," oozed the mud through between her toes. "Oh," said Mrs. Potter in surprise. "Shoop," squelched the mud around her heels. "Why," said Mrs. Potter, "this feels nice." She squoozed and slooped her way over to baby Ermagene, picked her up and hugged her hard, mud and all. "Ermagene," said Mrs. Potter, "you are a pig, a happy little mud pig." Ermagene shrieked happily and plastered her mother's nose with mud. Right There in the pig pen, Mrs. Potter and Ermagine tromped and stomped and splashed. Mrs. Potter still keeps a spotless house. The doorknobs gleamed, the copper pots shined. She even scrubs the garbage before she throws it away. But on sunny afternoons, Mrs. Potter and Ermagine slip away to the pig pen, take off their shoes, and dance a messy mud jig together. And that is the end of the story of Mrs. Potter's pig.